Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of RE345, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called The Hegemony, written by AntiMoneySquandering. The floor recognizes the Honorable Sentient from the Tarrant contingent. Thank you, Arbiter. The alien skidded forward on its many legs, stopping in the center to address the gathered species. Some sat upon chairs reminiscent of thrones, grandiose structures of metal and stone inlaid with precious metals and technology. Others were seated upon more humble arrangements, occasionally casting jealous glances at the aliens who sat as their betters. Both, however, disdained to acknowledge the representative from the lowest classes, seated towards the back of the chamber on the ground itself. The Tarrant likewise ignored them, directing its oratory to the others. The esteemed members of the Hegemony, it announced, bowing a slender pale blue frame at the waist, its legs lowering in unison. It raised itself and performed the gesture again, albeit by barely lowering itself, towards those seated in more basic seats. And aspiring candidates. As you know, the Tarrant, along with the Amtar and the Lanel, were founding members of this great alliance. We have been there, guiding, leading since the start. So do not misunderstand me when I say that what has been brought before us in this setting poses the single greatest risk to the Hegemony's rule in living memory. There was a surge of noise at that closing statement, mainly from the Hegemony members banging fist, claw, and tentacles onto their ornate seats. The candidates were only slightly less vocal, the limbs pounding on the unadorned metal. Those seated on the floor furthest away remained silent. The Tarrant opened its maw to speak again, but noticed the seated Amtor stand. The Tarrant shook the vibrant orange spines that emerged from the back of its robes in acquiescence and returned to its seat. The Amtor popped up its huge throat sack in thanks and waddled into the center of the room. It took a moment to stare around at the audience as the Tarrant had, its bulbous black eyes reflecting back the faces of those daring enough to return his gaze. It raised its bladed forelimbs into the air, clashing them together to create a disconcerting keening noise that caused some watching aliens to lean back or cry out in discomfort. The Amtor licked its blackened lips, moistened them till they matched the wet sheen of its skin, and slowly lowered its forelimbs. It stabbed them into the floor and leaned its bulk upon them heavily. "The Tarrant speaks the truth," it rasped, its prehensile tail rising from behind its back to point at the members in turn. "The Hegemony was built and has thrived on a few unshakable tenets, the key foundations of which are simple, even for those new to the Empire." The tail flicked out in an arc to indicate the aliens sat on the floor. 3 species were represented, 2 in large groups that huddled together, staring up at the assembly. The 3rd species was marked by a sole member, seated away from the others, their expression calm. The Amtor turned so that its back was to these. "Sacrifice for greatness. Everyone must earn their place." It swept its tail out to gesture at the other full members of the Hegemony. "Those of you who sit here as heads of our empire, equals to me and mine, you have served your time. You have done your duty, and now you justly enjoy the spoils of your labor." Many of the aliens spoke up in waves of approval and agreement, the Amtor smiling with razor spine-like teeth that occasionally pierced the meat of its mouth. A few delegates in the lower seats remained silent, however, some now deigning to glance at the species sat huddled in the back. "So why, then, are we here? What threatens the Hegemony? An outside force, a new enemy?" Its speech, still croaking and rough, was none the less increasing in volume, its throat sac thrumming with the force of its voice. It stabbed its tail out towards an alien seated on a basic chair, a small reptilian biped that licked its eyes nervously with a long red tongue. "No! Instead, it is a threat from within our own ranks that draws us here today. The sentient from the Arbel contingent. Speak!" The reptilian alien continued to lick at its eyeballs for a few more moments, while the heavy gaze of the Amtor and the others lay upon it. Eventually, it stood, opting to clamber up onto its seat given its diminutive size. It trembled slightly, other members of the race behind treading soft encouragements. It batted the tar-nail device suspended at its chest, clearing its throat softly before finally addressing the awaiting crowd.
Greetings, fellow candidates, esteemed Hegemony members, the aspiring.
The Hegemony members, led by the Amtor, bristled at being addressed second before expressing their shock at the arbol including the lowest class in its introduction. The small arbol, still trembling slightly, weathered the tide of noise, the frills on its neck fluttering.
This is the greatest empire that the universe has seen. That is true. We do not doubt the might of the Hegemony. However, it is built upon pain. It relies on tactics of intimidation and abuse. It enslaves those who wish to join, and those who choose not are lucky if they are given the option of enslavement.
Slavery! The Amtor bellowed, its throat sack inflating with its deep laughter. Its black eyes remained fixed on the arbol, however, the false mirth never reaching those dead eyes. We merely offer the aspiring a chance to be a part of something far greater. Access to technology greater than any in the galaxy. And yes, in return, we expect them to do more. To earn this gift we give them. To provide their people, to power the labor required for the gargantuan hegemony to flourish. For the many to be safe, some must be put in harm's way. We have all done our time, Arbol. We have risen. So can they. The assembled aliens broke out in cheers as the Amtor finished its speech, the Tarrant rising to its multitude of feet once more to join it in the center. It offered a mollifying smile at the still baying audience, before raising its spindly limbs high into the air for quiet. A glance quickly down at the far shorter Amtor, which returned the gaze, blinking slowly. They returned as one to stare at the Arbol.
May I inquire as to why you have brought this up only now, esteemed Arbol delegate?
The Tarrant questioned, its voice measured, soft, but carrying easily to all corners of the room.
Your people have earned the rank of candidate, after all. You have completed your aspiring.
It paused, looking around the room as the seated species began to mutter amongst themselves, some throwing pointed glances at the reptilian aliens. The Tarrant allowed its gaze to also pass over the aspiring themselves for the first time. A smile painted on its face.
You, who would bring down our system, have already benefited. Why would you seek to destroy that now? Could it perhaps be your recently failed application for full Hegemony member status?
The Arbol contingent all jumped up in agitation as their speaker protested this. The room a cacophony of sound as the gathered aliens roared their disapproval. It began to abate, the aftershocks reverberating. The Tarrant opening its mouth to speak once more, its posture relaxed.
We agree with the Arbol.
The Tarrant closed its mouth in surprise at the intrusion, staring at the seated audience to determine who would dare speak out. After a moment, it turned slowly to face the aspiring. The two larger groups remained seated on the floor, huddled together, even closer, as if they feared punishment by association. The sole member of the third aspiring species was now on its feet and walking towards them at the center of the floor. The Tarrant blinked a few more times, unable to wipe the shock from its face as the creature stopped just before it, barely reaching its waist in height.
Your opinion means nothing, aspiring, the Tarrant hissed in fury. You have not earned the right.
There was a scratching noise as the Amtor lifted its bladed limbs into the air again, shuffling forward and slamming them down in either side of the unflinching, outspoken alien.
Where are the other representatives of your race?
The Amtor growled, its breath a hot mist.
Aspiring to learn the place better, if they can see executions with their own eyes.
The alien turned from the Amtor, ignoring it, and looked up to the gangly Tarrant, its head cocked slightly to one side.
I represent the combined forces of humanity,
the alien continued, idly reaching out and tapping the bladed forelimb of the Amtor and listening to the noise it emitted.
We recommend that the Arbol's comments be enacted with immediate effect.
The Tarrant laughed, an ugly sound, leaning over the Amtor to stare even closer at the unimpressive alien.
Robot human, your race is aspiring now, whether it wishes it or not. You cannot leave.
The human closed its eyes, and its voice rose, becoming louder than they thought its body should be capable of.
We have no intention of leaving. We do not wish to start a war with the hegemony, but we cannot allow this practice to continue. And while we do not wish for war, let me assure you that we have become very skilled at it.
The Amtor laughed, its limbs shaking with exertion. After a moment, it stopped and looked up at the Terrant, surprised that it had not joined in. The Terrant had flushed a deep purple color and taken a step back from both the Amtor and the human.
How is it speaking? Aspiring do not have Tarnal devices. It should be unable to understand us. How is it communicating?
The human, eyes still closed, unerring, pointed its face towards the panicked Terrant. The Amtor swung its ponderous, damp head between the both, confused. The Terrant struck its own skull with one clawed hand, its eyes wide and breathing unsteady.
It's in our heads. It's speaking in our fecking heads.
The Amtor turned back to the human, still nonplussed, raising one of its edged limbs in the air as if to squash the annoyance. The limb remained suspended in the air, the Amtor grunting with surprise.
You asked where the other representatives of my race were. We sent one because we only needed one.
The Amtor licked its lips unconsciously as it listened, the human's face completely still and unmoving as it delivered its speech. The human opened its eyes suddenly, a vivid green, and jerked its gaze sharply to the left. Accompanying this were two loud cracks, and the forelimbs of the Amtor shattered. Pieces of broken bone and ichor falling wetly to the floor. The Terrant turned to leave, but froze. The only movement the slowly increasing shaking of its venomous back spines. One by one, they shattered, like glass vibrated beyond breaking point, into orange shards. As it howled, purple blood ran down both of the holes now dotted in its back, and the rivulets from its blue eyes, covering its slim chest. Both aliens fell to the floor, the Terran still twitching softly. The human stepped over these bodies and looked around the seated aliens arrayed before it. It smiled, the only movement of its mouth as it addressed them.
As I said, while we are very good at it, we do not desire war.
The human turned to leave, ensuring to not step on the growing puddle of mingled purple and green ichor that pooled on the floor.
The hegemony, as you know it, will die one way or another. That is up to you to decide if you die with it.
End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.